Hi there, how to use reference tracks like a pro. And I'm thinking that this video will be really helpful for production music composers particularly, which is where my experience and expertise lies. So I'm going to be talking about this from a production music point of view primarily, although actually it'd be useful if you're using reference tracks in some other context as well. I just want to be really clear that, what is a reference track? I wanted to be really clear that I'm thinking in terms of a reference track as being a piece of music that's given to you to listen to for you as a composer to then go away and create something similar with a similar vibe, a similar style, maybe an album based on sort of two or three reference tracks which are creating the concept for an album or something like that. So that, as opposed to using reference tracks in another way for transcription and for learning, which is, in my mind at least, a totally sort of separate thing. And I'm going to do a separate video on that because I think it's really important. So there's the transcription and learning side of listening to other people's music and reference tracks and comparing your music with it. And there's the sort of, using a reference track as a creative guide to give you an idea of what your music should sound like, to create a whole album or create some more tracks based on that particular reference track that you've been given. Now, most libraries, I can say most libraries will only give you one or two reference tracks. It varies. Some will give you a couple and say that they want their music to sound like this. Others will give you a whole album and say that they want their music to sound like this. It'll depend on whether you're just creating a track or two or an album or two. And hopefully, and this doesn't always happen, hopefully the reference tracks will all sound coherent and have something in common that you can hang on to and also tie in with the title or the concept that you've been given for the album. That doesn't always happen in my experience. So that's the first thing, is just to work out or to be clear in your mind about what a reference track is, what you're using it for, what you're hoping to get out of it. And we're going to go on and talk about how you actually would use a reference track then to create some more tracks of your own in that style. Now, my first port of call on this is to actually explore a little bit wider than what I've been given. So generally speaking, if I'm given three reference tracks or even actually a whole album as a reference, I will generally speaking go and do some listening to some other tracks and other albums from other production music libraries in a similar vein, similar style, similar title, similar sort of keywords, just to get a bit of an overview. And I'll add that to the reference track list. The reason for that being that, with the best will in the world, it can sometimes be too easy to sort of not reproduce, but to get too close to the references or just get too sort of tied into the ideas that have only occurred in three tracks. If you have a wider, broader sort of span of music to draw on for inspiration, then the chances are you're going to create something that, well, it should be better, and it should be hopefully not too closely tied just to those three tracks that you had been given, and also will be, within the brief that you've been given as well. So that's my first port of call. Listening. I just do some general listening, get some stuff in the general vibe, make a playlist, and then start doing some fairly serious research on them. So the first thing that I would be looking at is instrumentation, obviously, and don't do it now, but certainly at the beginning I used to write down, literally be writing down, well, what can I hear, what instruments can I hear, and writing a list, really easy. It might be worth writing a list also of sort of the style of instrument. If it's like guitar playing, is it a particular type of guitar, the sound? I'm not an expert on that, but just putting down as accurately as you can the instrumentation is really straightforward and simple. Next thing to have a think about is the sort of nitty-gritty, which is the stylistic features of the tracks as a whole. Listen through to them. What's the tempo, generally speaking? this will vary depending on the brief, but are they all roughly in the same ballpark? Can the tempo vary and it still be this type of track that fits the brief? Have a really careful listen. I would be writing numbers down as well. There's no reason why you can't do, because, you know, particularly certain genres of music have a particular feel and groove in a particular tempo. That might be really, really important. Time signature wise, are you listening at 4 on the floor and 4/4 all the time? There's some 3/4 in there, some unusual time signatures, 6/8 or 5/8, or, you know, changing time signatures. What is the general time signature? Really importantly, have a really careful listen to the tonality. So, you know, basics like major, is it major, minor, is it modal? Has it got sort of little inflections or little tonal sort of flavors that give it that sort of stylistic sort of tone that's going to fit in with the brief? What's the chord progressions like? And I would be sitting, generally speaking, at the piano or on a guitar, if that's your thing, working out what some of the chord progressions are. Not to copy them, but just to get an idea of, you know, what's being used. And you know, for some things it might be really, really straightforward and simple, but other types of music might have more complicated added chords and stranger sort of chord relationships that give that particular style of music its particular flavour and vibe. Have a look also at the structure. I did a video a couple of weeks ago about production music structure, and broadly speaking, production music tracks will fit into that flow and that structure, but also have a really, really careful listen to how the composers of your reference tracks have structured the pieces as well. And then generally anything else that sort of you can think of that gives it its feel and its quirkiness and its particular vibe and its particular style. And I'm writing these things down. I'm writing a list of stuff, and I'm looking for common denominators then. I'm looking for common instrumentation. I'm looking for common tonalities, common time signatures, common tempos, etc., etc. And then sort of drawing that down to a list. Okay, well, it's probably going to have these things in it to get it in the ballpark of, you know, what the library brief is giving me. My next stage then is to create a template. Particularly if I'm going to be creating an album, all in one style, I will sit and create a basic template. And I do that generally from scratch, actually. I don't do anything exotic by any stretch of the imagination. I mainly put sort of 6 or 8 instruments in there, or 10 instruments in. And I have, this would make a good thing for a video, wouldn't it? I also have some preset contact loady-uppy thingies. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but I can load up all my strings in one contact, for example. It saves a lot of time. I'll learn what the words are and perhaps put that in a future video, because that's a really good time-saving tip. Having made a template and done all my listening and my research, I would leave it. Personally, that would be my first day's work on it, and I would leave it for a day just to let it stew and just to let it fester in my mind. I might have a listen to the playlist in the evening or something, but I wouldn't then immediately start writing, because I think there's a risk of just, you know, you're having stuff in your earworms in your head and just repeating what you've heard, and you don't want to do that. You need time to synthesize the elements that you've come up with, and, you know, sort of the pot needs time to boil and to simmer, and hopefully something might regurgitate out next day. So next day I'd leave it for a day or whatever, and I personally, the way I do it is that I would start off by writing a starter of 3 tracks in the style that I'm going to do. And I wouldn't really pay a lot of attention to this, to the quality of it. I would just be making sure that I'm getting the style right, the feel right, the instrumentation right, tempo, so that it has a sort of sense of being in the right ballpark. And I'd be doing 3 of those. And then again, my personal workflow is to leave those for a day and to come back to them the next day, and then to choose one of those 3 and to complete that in my own time. Now, going back to the reference tracks, I think it's really important that you don't finish your track and then listen back to the reference. Again, what works for me, may be different for other people, is that I tend to choose my 1 track that I'm going to complete. I get it to sort of 80% or so of being finished, and, you know, so I'm reasonably happy with it. I've got a full structure, I've got all the chords, I've got the melody, whatever. it's an outline of the track as I see it. At that point, I go back to the references and compare it with the references, thinking, well, okay, does this actually really fit in with what I've been listening to? Is it too far away? Is it too close? Is it just about right? There's another video in there as well, isn't there, about how close to get and how not. So I don't think there's any point in totally finishing the track and then comparing with the reference. Get it so, in your mind it sounds like a completed piece of music, even though it might not be totally done. Go back to the reference and have a comparison and adjust as necessary. Okay, I hope that's been really helpful. References, as I say, I think are really, really helpful, particularly in the early years. If you're getting good quality references, and you do start to learn exactly where to look for other reference tracks and how to use them as well. I'm going to do a video, I think, on how to use other tracks as a musical reference in terms of how to teach yourself, I think, as a learning tool, how to literally dissect a track and use it as a template, not to be put out into the world, but purely as a cognitive, I was going to say, what's the word for teaching? I don't know, but it's purely as a teaching exercise for yourself, which is a separate thing from what we've been talking about, and that will come too. If you're still here, congratulations. And I just wanted to add one thing. It occurred to me, because I'm getting quite a lot of comments and a few emails from people now, asking for advice and stuff, and asking for feedback on tracks. And I don't do track feedback in a paid sort of consultation way at the moment. But I thought it might be quite a nice idea to ask you, whoever's out there, the subscribers, of all 1,000 of you as there are now, if you would like to send a track to me for some feedback for me to do live on one of the YouTube videos, I would love to do that. I think I would probably be able to give you some pointers and be quite helpful. I would probably prefer if it was production music, and I would probably prefer if it was more in the sort of orchestral instrumental ballpark. I'm not great at pop, rock, EDM, that sort of thing. It's not quite my wheelhouse. But if you've got something that's a bit more, as I say, a bit more orchestral or instrumental, get in touch if you would like me to review it, and I will do some track reviews on the channel. If you're happy for it to go live on YouTube and to be heard on YouTube, that would be brilliant. Thank you for listening. If you have any ideas of other stuff you'd like to add about reference tracks, do so in the comments below. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.